Thanks, David. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. How are you all? It's great to be here for Human Synergistics this morning. This is my first conference, so I'm a learner, just like you. My greatest challenge this morning is going to be keeping into the time slot. So if you think I'm lagging, just push me along, and if you think you want to explore something, just yell out. But as David said, I've been a CEO of 3 organisations for the last 20 years. I've about 35 years' experience doing change. But what I want to share with you today is those 3 journeys and the things that I've learned through that process about transforming culture and making change happen in a constructive and positive way. So who am I? Richard Harding. I've run 3 different organisations. David talked about who they were, most recently icare in New South Wales. And I'll talk a little bit about each one of those in a minute. But I thought I'd just talk a little bit about who am I. So I started working with LSI and HS about 22 years ago. And in those days, I had my first LSI, and we used to put a big mat on the floor with the LSI, with the circumflex on it. And you'd stand up with your LSI 1 or 2 and talk to your peers about the good, the bad, and the ugly. And in the organisation I was on at that stage, they'd then tell you and give you direct feedback about the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I found that to be one of the most confronting things I've ever experienced in my life. I have very little of dependent or conventional, and in fact, 0 green at all. And this financial controller stood up and he said to me, "I just don't understand why you can't follow rules. Everybody else follows rules. We have systems and processes and rules, and you should follow all the rules." And it was really, to me, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm having this massive impact on other people. And I didn't realise that I didn't know. And around about the same time, we had a new CEO come to IAG, I was there at the time, and he was the first CEO I'd heard talk about culture. He was the first person who actually explained what he thought culture should look like and set expectations about what leaders should do to create culture. And I'd been part of a group of 3 guys who we were sort of senior in the organisation, but we were well known in the organisation as the 3 fat cynics. And that's because generally we'd sit right at the back of most management presentations, and we just whisper to each other, cynical comments about, "Oh, you didn't believe that when that happens," or whatever it was. We were generally undermining in our presence and not very constructive, right? And so it struck me to start reflecting on, I'd been at IAG in NRMA in those days, about 10 years by that time, and had 8 different CEOs. And I could see how each of their styles and each of their leadership propositions or approaches had impacted the culture of the organisation, the performance of the organisation, and how the organisation got things done. And that's when I really first started thinking deeply about what culture was and why it had such an important role to play in any organisation that wants to change or transform or to go forward. So very quickly, I just want to take you through each of the organisations that I've been part of and had the great, genuine pleasure to lead. TIO is in the Northern Territory, a smallish business, about 250 people, about 200 million in revenue, if you like. And you can see in 2008, when I arrived, it was a pretty destitute company. We're losing about $50 million a year. Employee engagement running about 36. So that's 2 in every 3 people who came to work didn't want to be there. A hard place to be, especially in the Northern Territory where there's not a talent pool to grow people and not a place where you can go and swap people out very easily. A highly oppositional and avoidant culture. So I looked at some of the DJ's presentation and the Lent presentation this morning, those beautiful blue LSIs, and I was thinking, God, what I would have given to have an executive team that looked like that. But no, oppositional and avoidant is something that's very common in the insurance sector. We also like a good amount of perfectionists. Underwriters love nothing more than a good set of standards that they can't meet. So, we're kind of starting behind the 8 ball. But you can see there we put through over 6 years a raft of changes, not just to the business in terms of what it needed to do to fix pricing, underwriting, claims, work, capital management, all those sort of things, but primarily focused on the culture because we wanted to make it sustainable. The TIO was born out of Cyclone Tracy, and it really is seen in Darwin as a fundamental part of the community. And I'll come back to that theme in a minute. But as you can see there, we moved to a constructive culture. We had a reduction in the amount of oppositional and avoidance. We saw engagement get up to about 75% by the time I left. And we turned the profitability from a loss-making into making almost $100 million a year. At Tower Insurance in New Zealand, again, similar charts. If you look at those OCIs, we're really talking about oppositional avoidant cultures. But Tower had a different problem. It was the third player in New Zealand against IAG and Suncorp, two behemoths trying to compete against this very little local player. How do we compete? We had post-Christchurch earthquake trauma going on, both from a financial point of view, but also from a staff point of view, and we had to think about what was our model to compete. We couldn't compete on price, we couldn't compete on cost, we had very little sort of distinctive advantage, and we decided to go down the pathway of becoming a digital challenger, to digitise the business and take ourselves to market in a different way. And that meant we had to go from an oppositional culture to one that talked about innovation, flexibility, about doing new things, doing them quickly, and having responsiveness to all of our customers. It was actually a customer experience proposition. And you're not going to get that if you've got all of your people sitting in an oppositional avoidant place. So again, you can see we turned the culture around. We turned engagement from 30 to 60%. But more importantly, we saw the profit improve. Ultimately, it got to about $30 million by, again, the final year. And that middle line there, growth versus digital, you can see we went from losing share, but not much, by about 0.8%, but to growing the business by about 12% per annum, with over 50% of that business coming through our digital channels. So we transformed the company financially, technically from a delivery point of view, but also from the point of view of the culture and the way people engaged and worked in the organisation. And lastly, as David said, icare, the gift that keeps giving. Icare is probably well known to a lot of you, and I came in 2021 after there had been a significant amount of media, public scrutiny, parliamentary inquiries, and a thing called the McDougall Review, which is a statutory review by Justice McDougall. And he created 178 recommendations for us to implement. It was a wonderful thing to receive on my first day. And over 50% of those 178 recommendations had something to do with culture. There was allegations of corruption, allegations of abuse, allegations of all sorts of bad behaviours. And I came in and we needed to transform it. When I first arrived at icare, staff didn't want to identify with the business. They would change their shirts before they'd go home. We had little icare badges on your shirts, of course, as you do. And they'd take them off in the change rooms and put on their sweatshirt and so they could get on the bus without someone harassing them about, oh, you work at icare. So real breakdown of trust, breakdown of sort of belief in the organisation, and a real challenge for us to take forward. It's still early days. I was there for 3.5, almost 4 years. We've made significant improvement in the culture. You can see really great change there from moving from the negative to the positive. But still a lot more work to be done at icare, and I know the guys there are continuing to take that forward today. So why does culture matter? I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but one of the challenges Corinne said to me, she said, the most common question we get asked is, how do I convince my CEO that this is an important thing? Well, CEOs are frustrated because they can't get things done. Change doesn't happen the way they want it to do. They see disengaged and rising resistance to change, siloed behaviour from the leadership teams. There's a war from talent out there. They're pretty much struggling to get their strategic plan executed and delivered. At the same time, our stakeholders in the community, boards, regulators and customers, have ever-increasing expectations of what culture is. APRA, if anyone's here in the financial services sector, has a massive focus on culture as an identifier for risk in businesses. ASIC sees it as a lead indicator for conduct, and by that I mean customer conduct. People who sell policies to dead people, that sort of stuff. And lastly, of course, is employees and changing expectations of employees. I'm an old guy now. I've been doing this for 35 years. And the younger cohorts of people coming through have different expectations about what support looks like. In my day, it was kind of like have a cup of concrete, sweetheart, and toughen up. Nowadays, we have to think about the rising incidence of mental health, and we have to think about the fact that the community generally has a lower resilience to change. So if you put that in the context of the environment we're all working in, from the point of view of this massive AI change that's about to happen, so the biggest change since the introduction of personal computing 30 years ago is about to come across our community and our business world. And in the conversation that you hear in the community and the newspapers, lots of stuff, no one mentions people other than the idea that they're not going to have a job. And so at the moment, our people think about AI as fear and change that they don't want. And if your CEO or you are planning an AI program, you need to think about culture as a starting point for that change. So McKinsey have a great set of statistics that they love to roll out. 70% of changes and transformations fail. There's an underlying set of data that supports this, and the one I find most compelling is actually the reverse. Of transformations that fail, 72% identify employee resistance or bad management behaviour as the cause of failure. Culture eats breakfast is one of those great poster statements that we hear all the time. It was sometimes attributed to Michael Porter from Harvard, but in reality, it comes from a guy called Mike Field, who was the CEO and president at Ford Motor Company back in the early 2000s. And Mike needed to transform Ford, as we all know. Ford's a pretty difficult company to work in. He had a war room, and he had all of his charts, all the data he needed, the KPIs he wanted to see change, and on the wall, and he'd hold his executive team meetings in this room, and on the wall he had culture eat strategy for breakfast. But the statement I really love that he made in an interview with the HBR, he actually says something to the effect of, because I'm not going to be able to quote it directly off my head, but anyway, something to the effect of, you know, if you have all the best plans in the world, or you can have all the best plans in the world, the best strategy, the best ideas, if your culture isn't aligned to accept that, it will die on the vine. And so the message, I think, for all of you is if you're planning big change, if you're thinking about taking the organisation through transformation, and DJ's presentation, I think, was a fantastic case study on that, what are you thinking about culture? And I'll come to that more. The last point is one on the bottom of the page. Companies that address and identify deep-seated mindset barriers to change are 4 times more likely to succeed and have successful and sustainable change happen. 4 times more likely. It's a pretty compelling reason to pay attention to the culture of the organisation when you're trying to make change happen. So, I've got about 10 minutes left to actually talk to you about what I learnt, which is why I said at the beginning I'm probably going to go over time, but I'll rush through some of these. But these 6 things really are the things that I have distilled out of that 20-odd years of leading organisations through change and transformation. And really, they are, I suppose, not rocket science. A lot of HR practitioners out there will look at these and say, yeah, of course, that's of course. But it's a lot harder to do than it sounds, and it takes time. So let's jump into it, and I'll talk through some of them in depth, and some of them I'll skip over because they're pretty obvious. Creating belonging is one that I'm really passionate about. It's one that I actually have a great deal of conviction towards. About 25 years ago, Simon Sinek, everyone will know who Simon Sinek is, the optimism company, did the talk on the Golden Circle, which later became Start With Why. And it was all about inspirational leaders, and really it was a marketing-based kind of thing, talking about how, if you start with the why, it creates the right motivation and inspiration for people to give more. Another guy, and I'm going to get this name very wrong, but Nikos Moukinanagas, Greek guy obviously, wrote a book on purpose, who highlighted that actually, if you can lift the purpose to being a moral purpose and have a higher moral ground, you would have long-term sustainable differentiation. And he came up with 4 basic attributes. You could either have a heroic, an altruistic, an excellence-based purpose, or a discovery. So heroic is perhaps someone like Henry Ford who said, I want to democratize automobiles. Or it might have been Google, before it became Alphabet, who said, we want to organize the world's information. Altruistic, well, the example Nikos uses is Walmart, believe it or not, and these days we wouldn't look at Walmart as an altruistic company. But Sam Walton, when he started, he would set the tone with his buyers going out to negotiate in buying the goods into the business, into the retail shop, and say, you're not trying to do the best deal for Walmart. You're trying to do the best deal so our customers can get the best outcome. And really, he put the customer firmly in the centre of everything that the organisation did. The other altruistic one that I like is icare. It is a social purpose organisation, and caring for people of New South Wales is the purpose that we came up with at icare. Excellence is classic, logical companies like Apple, high standards, perfectionist around engineering, design. BMW would be another example. The Economist, anyone who reads The Economist, high quality journalism. They're companies that strive for excellence. And discovery is this looking for the new. Again, people like Sony, people like Virgin. So if you can lift your purpose in your organisation to be connected in a moral way and create that moral higher ground, it connects your business to the community that everyone works in. It connects your people to the business. And it's the starting point for defining the culture that you want. One of the high-level big messages that I want to leave you all with at the end of this is you have to integrate culture into your strategy. If you're in an organisation where you have a strategy and then HR has a separate conversation about culture, then it's never going to work. Unless you're having those conversations hand in hand, side by side, aligned together, you won't get where you need to be. And you'll get very short-term change without having sustainability. So integrating culture into strategy to me is fundamental. And the best way to do that is by using a moral purpose that can give you that higher moral ground. As I said, connecting people to the business. And it's beyond the financial returns. Every single organisation I've gone into, and you can see that most of them that I've been CEO of when I went in, they were in pretty bereft states. Underperforming, poor staff outcomes, poor customer outcomes. And all of those had great vision statements. We want to be the best at. We're going to be the world's greatest. We're going to have the highest something. They didn't ever have an inspiring connection to the communities that people operate in or to the nature of the business that they were operating in. I'm lucky. Insurance has a natural connection. Insurance, if we don't have insurance, it's a bit like banking. If you don't have insurance, the economy doesn't work. People can't invest in houses, they can't drive cars, businesses won't employ people. So insurance has a natural connection to the community that's given me an advantage to create that conversation with the people of the organisation. Invest in leadership. And we've heard this morning 2 companies that have been doing exactly that. And it might sound like, this is pretty obvious. But my experience is not many companies do it, and not many companies do it well. Top team alignment is critical. And by alignment, I mean not just about the strategy, I mean about the culture that you're trying to pursue. Top team alignment around what it is that you're trying to achieve across the organisational change on a multi-year horizon, so that your team is 100% bought in to the change you want to make. And that means creating vulnerability for them. And you've heard that this morning from both Lint and from DJs. Really part of what you're asking people to do is to unlearn the thing that's made them successful for the last 20-some years of their life. We all grow up in organisations where fighting our way to the top, politics, internal politics, siloed behaviour, withholding information, all that sort of stuff is generally rewarded or it's recognised as how you get on. And what we're asking people to do at this time is to put all that aside and learn something different, to learn a different way of behaving, a different way of engaging, a different way of operating to be successful, and to take a much longer-term view than most people want to take. Part of that is this point of role modelling, and I'll talk about that more in a little while. But really, whilst you focus on the top team, you need to not forget about the middle layers. In some organisations, they talk about the concrete layer. Nothing goes up, nothing comes down, it all just stops in the middle. And until you can engage those middle layers of the organisation and bring them on the same journey that you've had, that you take the executive team on, and you take them on the same learning process, again, it'll all die on the vine. A couple of times this morning, we heard people talk about defining what good leadership looks like. And that, to me, is critical, unless you can have that common understanding of what good is. And that's where the LSI and the OCI comes in. It gives you a picture that people can attach to give them a great sense of what they're trying to get to and where they're going to go. Common language. Again, this morning, we saw Lint align their values to the LSI or OCI constructive styles. Every time I went into an organisation, we redid the values and we used achievement and humanistic as the primary styles by which we define the values of the organisation. And we get those two running, we lift our self-actualised nature, and we go forward as a constructive business. I'm going to skip this one because I'm running out of time a little bit. One of the things I just want to mention is it talks about a clear communication plan. Every time you talk about a decision, every time you have something to communicate, you communicate it in the context of the values and the culture. I spent 4 years in China, which I was talking to some of the guys about, and you learn about propaganda. And I used to say to my internal comms team, it's got to be more like propaganda. Not in a Communist Party central sort of dictatorial way, but certainly don't leave people guessing. Be clear about the message you're sending. Be consistent in the message you're sending, and have it all line up top to bottom, purpose, values, and communication plan, all in one structure. This is probably the other one I'm going to spend a bit of time on, which is redefining performance. And this is probably the hardest part for most organisations. In most organisations, we define performance based on the what? More sales, less costs, more profit, whatever it might be. Sell more chocolate, open more stores, etc. You need to bring the how, the behaviour set, the values, into that performance management discussion. And you need to have goals that are set alongside the what goals that describe the expectations of the how. If you don't do that, then creating those opportunities for feedback, for growth and personal development become very, very difficult. And I'll tell you a little story here, take a little bit of time, but at TIO, we had a lady who ran our claims team. And she hit the lights out on all of the financial metrics that you could think of. And her leader came into the executive team, we were doing a people discussion, and he was coming in with the proposition that we were going to give her a really big bonus and put her in as a hypo-performing candidate for future leadership roles. And I challenged that view because this person also happened to have about 40% staff turnover, high absenteeism, and a very, very red culture index. Now, we don't want to use the OCI or the LSI as a performance indicator, but we can use those other measures to have the right conversation. And at the executive team, it took us about 3 hours. We actually had a break for lunch in between. We sat around a round table, which actually made a lot of difference for lunch, and kept the conversation going. And we got to the point where the team agreed that actually we should help this lady find a job somewhere else and not reward her for the stellar performance she'd achieved. And she did. She left the organisation. And it was a fantastic change and a fantastic outcome. So you have to be brave to act quickly when the how isn't fitting. Coaching organisation, and this links to the redefining of performance, and it links to the whole thing, and you've heard it from everyone this morning. I want to give you a slightly different perspective on it. I'm now a non-executive director and sort of running my own little enterprise, trying to do more of this leadership work. But I went to this AI for non-executive directors course. And the guy who happened to run that is chairman of the Bulldogs, for those of you at Sydney who know rugby league. And he was talking, and it really resonated to me. He said, you know, if you're a sporting team, those players that we're expecting high performance from, they have coaches for everything. They have a nutrition coach, they have a physical coach, they have a methodology coach. You know, how do you kick the ball the best way? How do you tackle the best way? And they have a mindset coach. And he said, we spend more money as a football team on coaching, and that is how we get the best performance from the talent that we've invested in. But organisations aren't so good at coaching as a key capability. If you're an Olympian, you think about our Olympic swimmers and their success and the fact that they've got a sponsor now from a corporate enterprise, which is kind of an interesting challenge. But one of the things that they invest in is coaches. Again, mindset coach. It's very difficult to be successful in any field without having someone help you think about your mindset. I've worked for about 12 years now with a leadership coach and executive coach, and I've got to tell you, it makes a difference. But the point here is you need to turn your organisation into a coaching organisation. And that means your leaders need to be able to give feedback, and they need to be able to coach their people, and they need to be able to seek feedback. And this is, again, where that vulnerability comes in. Until your leaders are having the conversations with their teams in their one-on-ones, their monthly meetings, whatever it is, and they are saying, I just wanted to get your feedback on that meeting we had the other day. How did you think I went with that conversation? I sent out a memo about XYZ, and I just wanted to get your feedback. How do you think that landed for everybody? Unless those conversations are going on in the one-on-ones, they're not role modelling, they're not seeking feedback, and they're not creating an organisation where people think it's their obligation to coach. Because it's all about personal development. So back on the leadership page, one of the things I didn't talk to is leadership development must lead to a cultural outcome. If you have your leadership development plan in place and it doesn't have a cultural outcome as an enterprise-wide goal, why are you doing it? Because ultimately, the thing that's going to make the organisational performance change is the overall culture and the way people engage with the organisation. So coaching is critical and a key chunk of it. And last part of the sort of key learnings is this piece about everyone can make a difference. We talk a lot about executive leaders in the organisation, and we talk a lot about their role. But critical to that success of that cultural change is, again, building it into everything that you do. And the socials matter. I don't mean the social media. I mean creating social opportunities for people to interact. Businesses are a community of people who have a common goal and a common interest. And you need to create a social connection that is beyond just the 9 to 5. And that's about the inclusion of people, the recognition of people, and engagement of people in all aspects of the change that's going on. We also heard this morning about recognition. Every organisation that I've done this work in, we've created a recognition program that is singularly focused around the values and around behaviour. Not on the what, but only on the how. And we create social events that support that are aligned to the strategies that we're implementing that drive us to achieve our goals. Integrate culture into your strategy. It can't be something that HR does, and if it is in your organisation, think about how you can get the CEO using some of those thoughts up front about failure, how often transformation fails and why it fails. And integrate it. Create a purpose that really has a moral reason for your people to feel inspired and motivated to make a difference and to come to work every day feeling like they have a reason to exist. And I'm just going to finish on that note with the conversation about icare, where I said people came in the morning, changed their shirts, and when they went home in the afternoon, they changed them again. We needed to rebuild trust. There was a broken trust between the leadership of the organisation and the front line, and there was broken trust between the leadership of the organisation and the government, the shareholder. And we needed to rebuild pride in what the organisation did. And underpinning that, when I first got there, I did this first town hall and really got this connection that people had with what the organisation did as its fundamental thing. We helped people who are in vulnerable times. Someone has a workplace accident, they have a motor vehicle accident, they get the dust disease from working in a dusty environment, whatever it is. They're high trauma, high impact on people's lives events. They're vulnerable. And our people love the fact that they are there for them at that point in time. And all we needed to do was connect our purpose to that reality and create the purpose that said we care for the people of New South Wales, and bring that then into our strategy and our culture. And we saw the sort of turnaround in 3 years that you saw on the slides at the beginning. It's very, very powerful, and it's very, very engaging in people. Create freedom with that framework. This is not about being a policeman and talking to people about what's good and what's bad and how you should behave and make it. It's about having people go on their own journeys. They need the freedom to work within that and to do things that they need to do. I found that a lot of the executives that I've worked with and coached over time have actually come to me and said, you know, actually, this has made a huge difference in my home life. The way I engage with my kids, the way I engage with my family, it's changed the way I think about things. And lastly, be patient. It takes time. Nothing is going to happen. You can see each of those stories I've told you is about a 6-year horizon. icare is 4, and it's still going. Be patient, it takes time, and be persistent. So with that, I'll thank you, and I'm sorry, David, I've gone over time, and wish you all the best for the rest of the session.